introduce you to Hiwatt number 2627, a very early 1972 DR504. That's the classic four-hole circuit. What's really cool about this, aside from it being a vintage Hiwatt, is that it was sold to us by Mr. Tim Box. He is a super cool human being who agreed to speak with us a little bit about his music career with the Barbs, a British band that toured quite frequently in the early aughts. And this amp is a road warrior for sure. All original except for a little modification to the speaker outputs in the back. And we'll delve more into that in a demo video down the road. But Tim has since gone on to become a remedial hypnotist. Now he helps people who, like him, suffer from social anxiety. And of course in the music industry, many folks have talked about how crippling social anxiety can be a real problem on a daily basis. Patrick Carney of the Black Keys, Rob Zombie, they both talked about it in videos. I think with Joe Rogan, we'll put the links in the description here. And of course, perhaps the most famous internet guitarist, Steve Terraberry, has also talked about how he had to turn down a gig with Dragon Force because of his anxiety. So Tim is out there helping people. He agreed to talk to us not only about his music career with the Barbs, and you can check out their album Lupine Peroxide on Spotify, but he talked to us about what he's doing now, his book, his podcast with his wife, a lot of cool stuff, and we'd love to talk to him again. So if you have any questions that arise in your mind from this interview, please put them in the comments. Hopefully we'll get Tim to chat with us some more down the road. He's a super cool guy, and Tim, thank you so much, not only for the amplifier, but the work you're doing now, and the time you spent with us to talk about social anxiety and how you help people work through it. Thank you so much for joining us today. With us is Tim Box. He was guitarist, singer in the band The Barbs. He's previous owner of Hiwatt number 2627. That's a 1972 DR504, and he's since gone on to an interesting profession that's kind of very relevant to performers here. So Tim, thank you for joining us today.
Well, you're very welcome. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to chat with you.
So now, just briefly, you were, as I say, you were a guitarist singer in the band The Barbs. You've since gone on to be, per your website, a remedial hypnotist, helping people overcome their anxieties. You've got the full social media ecosystem. You've got, you're on YouTube. You've got a podcast. You've got a book. You've given a TED Talk. I really wanted to kind of start with your musical career and then work forward to where you are today and how that career helped inform your decisions here.
Yeah.
So how did you get into music? Did you really have a musical family? I think, as you say on your website, your father was kind of in the plumbing business, and
yeah, it's a weird thing actually. I don't know anyone in my family that's excessively musical. I know my mum used to like to play keyboards a little bit when I was younger, but it wasn't like we grew up learning music. I think my interest in music was peaked during school years. I think when some of my friends were starting to play music. I remember my sister was going out with a guy who played guitar, who showed me some chords in my youth, and that I think there was something about it that attracted me to it, which is weird as well, because I was quite socially anxious as an individual, and I think I was thinking about this recently when you were sort of talking about doing the interview, and it makes you re-examine things and thoughts that you had at the time, and I think there was something about I wanted to perform, but I didn't necessarily have the self-confidence to hold a space like, I don't know, acting or something like that. But music seemed to provide enough noise to drown out all the other concerns, if that makes sense. So it just appealed to me, and I think so. Yeah, I've often wondered what made music an appeal to me, but it's not in my family, weirdly. But yeah.
Interesting. So how did you kind of start learning your chops? What were your first bands and your first pro gig?
Oh, wow. Well, I originally I started playing guitar just to play guitar. I was strumming on some Smiths tunes. I used to like the Smiths a lot, and you could get the little songbooks that had the chords laid out, and then when I would strum along to my Smiths records, I enjoyed that. And then it was about a year into just doing that there was a school gig, and I was in the sixth, so I was what I suppose 16, 17, I suppose, and there was a concert being organised at the end of the school year, and a couple of people were forming bands to play this concert, and I just joined one of the bands then, and that's when I sort of really fell in love with playing, because it seemed to have a purpose suddenly. It was like, oh, if I'm writing songs, if I'm singing, if I'm, it seemed then to have a functional use rather than just me sitting in my bedroom being all sad about things, which was, as us Smiths fans tend to, which is our MO. But, yeah.
So did you have kind of friends who had similar interests? Did you start to form those connections in school or outside? Did you start seeking live performances, things of that nature?
Yeah, I think it was definitely to try and fit in with a certain crowd of people that I admired or I wanted to be a part of. You do that sort of social climbing thing where you try and get the right group of friends and things like that. And it was definitely to try and have something relatable for those people. And then when school finished, we sort of carried on the band outside, because I actually made some genuinely, good friends that I still regard as really good people. Found people that I could relate to. So maybe that was something as well, that it felt like I had a common bond with people. I remember the first band I was in, the school band, it was called Pepperland Goes Bluey, from the Yellow Submarine film, and a line in that. And then I formed a band coming out of school called Out of Time, which it seems like a terrible name. What a lot of pressure we put on the drummer of that band, I feel, by calling it that. But then, we were really into like Ride and all the sort of shoegazing scene. I don't know if that translated to the States or not, but yeah, really, I mean, my fringe was down to my chin. It was like this, which really suited the socially anxious individual to have this curtain of protection. But yeah, those were the times, yeah, when we were doing that.
Were you finding a lot of gigs? Was there kind of a scene, if you will?
There really wasn't. I mean, I know that where I'm from, Chatham, in Kent, has a history of good, like a good mod scene, but that wasn't really what I was into, because we were more into the sort of the wall of noise shoegazing stuff. At the time, there wasn't that much of a scene, as I recall, and what we would have to do was hire the back room of the local pub and just say, well, look, we'll sell tickets, we'll fill it. We hired it for a fee. We had to put our own gigs on, basically. And I didn't really, because we're only an hour outside of London as well. So it seems crazy then. Maybe it was just we felt a bit young to start moving towards London gigs. But it wasn't until I was much older that I started to, we started, I got in a band where we got bookings and actually were hired to play rather than just renting the venue and putting on our own events,
What, I'm kind of curious. Shoegaze definitely has a huge following in the U.S. as well, and there's been a kind of resurgence of that, along with like '90s pop and grunge, and I mean, every genre seems to survive somehow. I'm just really curious, what is kind of your personal secret learning the particulars of shoegaze guitar?
I think it was just. I'd love to be able to give you an answer there. I think it was just thrashing around trying to make noises. It was a lot of effects pedals, as I recall. It was almost like it was more important to find a great pedal than it was to write a great song. I felt like that at the time. I was always sort of twiddling the knobs on my pedals and just seeing what noises I could get them to make, which seems really weird now I think of it. But and where. And I did this thing. We never tuned the guitars to, actual tuning in, like to an E. I would just pick up my guitar and just bring it in tune roughly. So what that meant was all of the harmonics and the way they were relating to the effects and the pedals would change all the time. So I remember there was I can't remember what the pedal was. I think it might have been an old Boss digital delay. If you put it on really, really super quick delay, it just squeals at you when you hit the strings. And I remember there was a bit in one of the songs where if I hit that pedal, it just made this really beautiful tone over the top of the music. But then of course it came to gig time, and the guitars are in a different place, it's all tuned to a different tune, and it just sounded horrendous, like somebody was dying. So there wasn't much art to it, as I recall. And I'm not saying that shoegazing guitar is all random stuff, but for me it was, because I'm not, remember, not a musical family, and it showed at times,
So now fast forward now to the Barbs. How did you get that going? How many, you've been through several bands, I guess, and you've got your live experience. How did
Yeah, I think there was. This is the thing. There was lots of bands that I went through. I mean, there was a band that I was in called Gouge that we were in. We moved to Wales to do that, and there was a big Welsh scene at the time. Bands like the 60 Foot Dolls and Catatonia and people like that, and we were sort of part of that crowd. And when I came away from that, and we split that band up, and the Barbs kind of came about. Just I think it was from my desire to just play music that I wanted to play, because I ended up, you do that thing where you join bands and you're playing their music, and it was a bit like, well, I want to play my music, I want to front the band, I want to do that. And along the way I'd found a really good drummer, Simon Hartop, who's an amazing drummer, and I knew I wanted to work with him, and we just sort of started to form the band around us, and yeah, and it came about really organically over a period of time, and it just very quickly we started. It was the first time, when you think, oh, I'm actually making a good noise now. This actually sounds like I know what I'm doing, even, and it felt like the apprenticeship had been served, and now this was my stab at doing something that was me, that would represent me musically, and yeah, so it sort of came organically from a number of bands and a number of people, and then we did at one point feel like we needed another vocalist, because my vocals were not particularly strong at the time. And when I say they're not particularly strong, I would struggle to do a whole gig without my voice cracking and drying up and that sort of thing. So we got Amy in to do the vocals. We kind of had this weird thing where she was in the UK from Australia. She bought one copy of the NME, answered one advert, and it was ours. And yeah, fit right in, and we started doing it, and it worked out pretty well.
Did she actually move to the UK, or how did you?
She was in the UK. She was like doing it for like a year. She was coming over, and she was probably going to go back, because she was doing some modeling at the time, and she wanted to try and do music because she felt she had an affinity with that, and she wanted to sing. And it just worked out where we started to do something worthwhile, and we started to get some attention and a modicum of success. She was able then to make the UK her permanent home, and then it changed her plans a little bit, I think, as it changed ours, I suppose. Yeah.
Interesting. You've actually there's a Wikipedia page for the Barbs, and
is there really? Oh my God! The things that you find out.
Right here, we'll put a link there in the site. Actually, when we were communicating through eBay, you noted that your album Lupine Peroxide is on Spotify. I haven't checked to see if it's still there, but your video is still up on YouTube.
Yeah.
Let's see. The UK release of the same record. Let's see. Let's go back here a bit here. The Philippines, you had that hit in late 2004, the single Massive Crush. The UK release of the same record was Single of the Week on Lauren Laverne's XFM show, and was for some reason played on BBC Radio 2 several times. The single received critical acclaim with 4 Ks from Kerrang, and was, according to NME, the best song about killing your parents, stealing guitars, and humping till dawn ever penned. On December 1st, 2004, they were one of the headline acts at the MTV Staying Alive Music Summit, playing to a crowd of over 50,000. They also made several tours of the UK with bands such as The Rocks. After the band broke up, guitarist Amy and guitarist vocalist Tim went on to form What Would Jesus Drive, and were to release their album Black and Blue in 2011. So you had a lot of the experience, the whole experience there.
Yeah, we had some good stuff. I'll tell you something about the Philippines adventure. It was such a weird experience, because we were just like an indie band. We had like, a bit of radio play. We had we were in, mildly successful indie chart wise, that sort of thing. And then something happened in the Philippines, which I don't know what it was, but somebody picked up the record, and it just went incredibly popular, and it was played on MTV in the Philippines a lot. And so somebody got in touch with us and said, come and do some shows here, because we want, there's a crowd that would like to see you. And so we did this really weird thing. Have you ever seen the film Total Recall, where Arnold Schwarzenegger, he goes from being a construction worker to a spy, and he buys the spy holiday. And the whole thing about the film is it actually happening, or is it just that's what he bought, was the experience of being a spy? Anyway, it was like we bought the rock star holiday, because it went from just doing our everyday jobs and doing a few gigs and having records out, to a small audience, to, oh my God, it's like we're the freaking Beatles in the Philippines or something. Because we literally arrived off of the plane and the mayor's entourage of vehicles met us at the airport to drive us to the hotel where the national news was waiting to do an interview for the evening news. And it was like, what's going on here? You know, and it was just the weirdest experience. And I'm sure that would have been a really enjoyable experience if it wasn't just coming completely out of left field and felt like you dropped through a hole into another dimension or something. And it was a really weird experience, but it was an amazing experience because we got to play, like we got to headline that festival for 50,000 people. And that was an incredible experience because it's one thing playing to a big crowd, but when you start playing a song and the crowd goes nuts because they know it, that was a really, you know, when you're like, I don't know if you ever had those moments where you're like, oh, I need to just remember this, don't I? I need to take this in because this isn't going to happen every day, you know. And it was just an amazing experience. But yes, an experience I'm really glad I had. But at the same time, it sort of made me realize, you know, people that have that pressure constantly, that they are that famous. It gave me a little bit of an insight into that world and how disconcerting it must be to constantly have people looking at you. And you know what I mean? You're sort of wondering. There was this weird thing actually in the Philippines. There at the time, I think there still is a massive rich-poor divide. You would, you know, we went to do a photo shoot for FHM in the Philippines because Amy was doing a photo shoot for them. And it was in this Hummer warehouse. So all these amazing vehicles, thousands of pounds of vehicles. And yet to get in there, we had to go into the back door of it, and it's slums. It's children with no shoes and begging, you know, and it was a real rich poor divide. And what you had was people who had TVs knew who we were when we were walking along the street. They were singing the song at us. People who didn't had no idea who the hell we were because it had only been like a couple of weeks. So when people were looking at you, you weren't quite sure, are they looking at me because they know I'm from that band? Or are they looking at us because, you know, Amy's a 6-foot blonde and they don't have them in this country, you know, and you didn't really know whether you were a curiosity or the people were, oh, I like what you do, you know, and that's quite disconcerting when you're not quite sure why people are paying attention to you. Coming from a social anxiety background, that's not a good thing for me, you know, when I don't know why people are looking at me. So it was a really weird experience, but really, I mean, ultimately a good one, one I'm pleased I had. But there was, weirdness abounded, definitely.
So, you mentioned you'd I think when we were discussing back and forth a bit, maybe your manager, tour manager, someone had suggested that you wanted to buy a Hiwatt, or that you should buy a Hiwatt, just to take it back to the gear here a bit. What was the impetus there, and how did you kind of go?
Okay, so this is going back a little bit when I was in Gouge, because that's the origins of the Hiwatt. We again, a slight brush with nearly being successful in Gouge. We got signed to EMI in the States. It was Hugo Burnham, who was the drummer in Gang of Four, who was A&R at EMI in the States at that time. He signed us. He heard our stuff from what we were doing because we had a single out around that time. I think it was because of the Welsh scene at that time that was getting a bit of attention. And we got a publishing deal with EMI, and so we got money for gear. And I remember at the time, the singer Jane was married to a guy called Nick Woolidge, who is an amazing engineer. Did a lot of work with George Martin, and I haven't followed his career lately, but I'm absolutely certain he works on some great albums. You know, he did a lot of he did the Beatles Love album, where that was the Cirque du Soleil Love album. You know that. Anyway, really good guy, and he was working at the time with Bernard Butler on his debut solo album, which everyone, you know, he was going into the studio and there was press waiting outside to hear Bernard Butler's solo album because they wanted to know what sort of music he was going to be doing, what sort of stuff he was going to come up with. And it was this time when I was thinking, oh, what should I buy? Because I was just going through two like PV combos that I just, you know, I'd collected over the years, that we scraped together my coppers to afford them, you know, and I was sort of, oh, that's an okay sound. And, you know, the band were like, well, we should get some proper gear so that it looks like we're a band rather than just like we've taken our bedroom amps into the venue. And he said, well, look, Bernard gets a great sound out of his Hiwatt, and all of his amps are Hiwatts. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I like the sound of his guitar on all the Suede records, so that sounds good to me. And he said, well, you know what? He gets all of his stuff from a place in Highgate they specialise in Hiwatts. And I said, okay, well, you know what I might do? I might go along there then. Nick came back one day from the studio and said, look, I chatted with Bernard. He'd be happy to go in with you and try out the amps with you to get the right one. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. So, because, Bernard Butler, one of my, modicum of a guitar hero for me. So this weird thing of turning up at Bernard Butler's house, sitting in his car with his heated seats and driving to the shop, and him going in there and trying out some guitar amps with me, which was an amazing experience as well. And the thing that, I didn't know if I was buying anything good or not. I literally strummed the chord, looked at him, and he was like, yeah, that sounds good. And I was like, okay, we'll have that one then, I think. I think the thing I was most interested in was it was the same year I was born, 1972. I thought, oh, that's meant to be then, isn't it? Obviously. And so I got the Hiwatt head, which is the head that you have now. And I got the cab for it as well, which is a huge cab, the Hiwatt cabs, aren't they? They're really... They're like, they're bigger than the norm, and they're so heavy as well. I remember thinking, this is such a heavy bit of gear. You really feel like you're getting your money's worth just for the weight of the actual item. But it was so loud. The thing that I remember about the Hiwatt, I was constantly battling, trying to drive the amp to get that amazing Hiwatt drive sound without drowning out every other bugger on stage so that we can't hear anything. Because, you go to a venue, and the sound guy's like, well, keep your amps low so that we can control the sound out the front and the monitoring and everything. Not with that thing, you can't. You've got to, if it's on one, it's loud, And so I just remember it being like, I'm not convinced I'm playing venues big enough to warrant this sort of amp right now. And I just felt massively overpowered with the gear. But it was later on that I sort of, I don't know, learned to love it a bit more, I think. But.
And did you take it kind of around the world, multiple tours? How much touring?
I tried to. I think what happened was there's a bit of a sad story with the Hiwatt cab, because we did a festival gig in my local area, and I used the Hiwatt then, and it sounded amazing. And I left because it was where we used to rehearse as well. So I felt comfortable just overnight leaving the gear there. Mistake, and I took the head away. When you think, was I in some way foretelling what was going to happen here? But the cab I left there, God knows how anyone stole it, because it was a massive bit of gear, but I never saw it again. And I tried to track it down. It was just, one of those things. But the head did travel around the world with me and did all the gigs that I did. I ended up putting it through a Marshall cab. And it sounded really nice through that, because the actual speakers weren't as hefty and loud as the Hiwatt ones. So I was able to drive the head a little bit more, and it sounded awesome. I was really pleased with it. And that was the setup pretty much I had for the rest of my guitaring career as well. I never really felt the need to look elsewhere, because it just did everything I needed to do,
Did you ultimately, at one point, the impedance, the impedance speaker selector switch kind of went bye-bye, and so you have it hardwired to 16 ohm and 8 ohm. Did you have any other issues with it on the road, or is it pretty?
I don't recall that I did. I think it was, this is the thing, I always treated it as quite a sort of fragile item, because it had valves in it, and I'm not massively experienced with valve amps, but it was pretty robust for what it was, and it's. I think it went through a fair amount of abuse getting thrown around in bands as well from when we were in the Barbs, we did a lot of touring around the UK. We would, in a year and a half, we must have done about 4 or 5 UK tours, because we really went at it when we were working hard to get somewhere. So it stood up to a lot of abuse. It was pretty good.
Yeah. And so what ultimately led to you kind of winding the Barbs down and graduating, kind of evolving to where you are now?
I think it just, there was definitely a couple of years near the end where so the Barbs split up because we kind of ran our course. If this with a band, you get sort of a window of opportunity. If you haven't kind of landed in a way that that you can perpetuate, you've missed your exit window. Do you know what I mean? So I felt like that was done, and Amy and I we were married at the time, and we started What Would Jesus Drive, which was just a 2-piece. We had a drum machine, and we just because it was a really easy setup to use, and so we did that for a while, and that was good, and we had some great success with that. And then we expanded to a 4-piece, and we did a lot of stuff there. We did a lot of sort of Radio 1 stuff there as well with that, and it just got to the point a couple of years in the end of it, I wasn't enjoying it anymore. I was starting to feel a little bit old for it, you know, because when you get in your 30s and everyone that you're gigging with, they're all in their teens or their 20s, you know, and you see the energy in them that you used to have for it, you know, and the excitement. And you're like, yeah, I don't have that anymore, do I? And there's one video we did, like the last video we did, and I'm looking at me in the video and I'm comparing me to when we were in the Barbs and it was all fresh. And I'm like, yeah, I look like I'm done with it. You know, I look like you know, if I'm looking at that guy singing that song, I'm thinking, why are you there? You don't seem like you want to be there, you know? And it was probably the catalyst for ending it for me was probably finding what I do now and kind of stumbling into this profession and realizing, oh, that excites me more than what I've been doing currently with the music. You know, it superseded it. It wasn't just that I'm not going to get famous, I'll try something else. There's obviously a bit of that, I suppose, to be fair, but it was more about, no, this excites me more than this music stuff has for a long time, you know. So and that's, it's never, to be fair, it's never waned with what I'm doing now. And as much as I loved all the music I did, and I've got some great memories from it, I don't look back with regret, because I know that the journey got me here, and I'm still very excited about where I am and what I'm doing now. So it feels like it felt like the right time to do it, you know.
Thanks. And what you're doing now is you're helping people overcome varying degrees of anxiety. You created the control system, just to set this up a bit. As I mentioned, you've got the full suite of social media to you know, how, you know, people can get in contact with you. And it's kind of relevant because about a year ago, one of the internet's most talented, most famed, most appreciated guitarist, Steve Terraberry, had been given an opportunity to join Dragon Force, which is a globally known act, ridiculously talented players. They had asked him to be a bass player for a tour, I think, in the US, and he started learning the songs. He accepted the gig, and then as the gig got closer, he realized that his anxiety was just not going to let him continue, and he unfortunately had to cancel the gig, you know, back out of the commitment. But you know, all the no hurt feelings, and he did a couple of videos about it, and he noted that YouTube provides him that, you know, it's his wheelhouse, that he can really express himself comfortably. But it kind of gets to the idea that, you know, the creative folks, artists of any genre, of any medium, really struggle with this. How did you talked a little bit about social anxiety, your anxiety throughout your, I guess, you know, just even learning guitar and even, you know, getting into the music industry. And one thing that struck me, I think, if I'm saying this correctly, is that you realize that trying to create these defenses against the anxiety and trying to avoid it really didn't work out ultimately.
This is the thing. I think we've got to, there's a certain amount of anxiety that we would regard as an appropriate response. Yeah. So an example would be when we're going on stage and we're feeling nervous. You know, I see people who are trying to get good at public speaking or trying to get rid of performance anxiety. And, you know, we always have to start with the idea that, look, when you're going on stage, you're going up there, and the fear is that you will be judged negatively. The people that you're performing to or for will say, I don't like you. Yeah, and that's the fear. That's the large fear of the social anxiety, the fear of judgment, the fear of rejection, that kind of thing. So, and it's amazing how many people are involved in music who suffer a lot of that anxiety in a social situation. And you might think, well, what the hell is that about then? If you're socially anxious, why would you stand up on stage to be judged? But I think there's also this drive to perform, this drive to be a certain person. And I think what it is, it's that paradox. It's those parts fighting against each other. And as much as you want to get up there and shine, there's also that bit of you saying, they're not going to like you. You're going to get rejected again. They're going to point and laugh or something like that. And it's sort of, there's a bit of confronting our biggest fear going on. So my thoughts, when it came to social anxiety, the thing I had to get into my subconscious at a core level was it no longer matters what other people think of me. Yeah. And that was, and that's a broad term. Obviously, essentially, we go for a job interview. It matters that they like us rather than the other person. We play a gig. It matters that the audience like the songs we're playing because that's our success is going to be linked towards popularity, that kind of thing. But ultimately, it doesn't say anything about who I am as a person if the person I'm talking to or I'm performing to at the time doesn't like what I'm doing. It just says it's not their thing, and to be able to do that can free you of a lot of the excessive stuff. Because I was finding my biggest worries became how anxious I was going to be. Is my anxiety going to cripple me and stop me doing my best, And at some point we've got to say, look, it's okay to feel anxious. Because if I can say that's okay, then I can just deal with my anxiety about the situation rather than my anxiety about how I'm going to respond to the situation. And me sort of getting past the worst bits of my social anxiety are what helped me, formulate the system that I use and how I go about this stuff. But, I don't think, an example would be, in terms of how it affected me, when we were in the Barbs, we were doing well. We did good gigs. The general consensus was that we sounded pretty good as a band, But I was aware that a lot of the gigs, the tour supports that were going to other people. And I was always confused by that at the time. And I look back now and I realized, because all those other guys, they were all hanging out together. They were at each other's gigs. They were hanging out afterwards. They were social. They were networking basically. And I couldn't do that. As soon as I went into a room of people that I respected what they do, clamped up. Couldn't be me. Couldn't say anything through fear of saying the wrong thing. And so I recognized that the social anxiety I brought, even though I was at, performance-wise, I could give it. I could get out of it, but it wasn't something I could do off stage. And that ultimately probably impeded our progress, I would say.
How did you how did you become aware that this was a kind of career path? Was there anyone who inspired you to have a connection to someone who said you should train for this, or did you just kind of start building from the ground up?
It's a series of experiences, I would say, because I just did it because I was interested in. I think I did a hypnosis weekend. It was learn hypnosis on a weekend, which I thought blew my mind as well, because I thought you had to have like a psychology degree to do anything like that. So to discover that was really eye-opening, and it sort of blew my mind that first weekend, because it's all those things that you see the stage hypnotists do, like sticking people's hands together and things like that, and getting them to forget their name, all this weird stuff. And I was just like, what is that possible? Can that even happen? And it opened up a new world to me. I left there feeling like I had magic powers. It was this really weird effect. And it wasn't any purposefully like, oh, let's do it for therapy then. It was just, I learned some magic tricks at the same time. I learned to juggle, all that silly stuff that you do because there's something in you that likes to perform in that way, weird stuff. And then it was only when I was practicing my hypnosis on a friend, and it was actually Gemma, who I think was at the time she was our DJ in What Would Jesus Drive. She was the third member that we added at the time, and she's a really good friend. And she used to let me practice on her my stuff. And I remember I had her hand stuck to the table one day with the hypnosis, and she was like, "Why don't you do something useful with this?" And I was like, "I believe I am. Your hand is stuck to the table." And she said, "No." She said, "I want to stop biting my nails because I'm getting married, and I don't want to be wearing false nails on my wedding day." And I was like, "I don't know how to do that, but rightly or wrongly, let's have a go." And so we just did a basic hypnosis session, and she stopped biting her nails. It was like a week later I saw her, or 2 weeks later I saw her, and she said, "Oh, look, my nails have grown back, by the way. I haven't bitten them since we did the session." And she was the sort of nail biter that would only notice she was biting her nails when she tasted blood. They were literally bitten down to the quick. And to be honest, that moment for me, when she showed me that her nails had grown back, was probably singularly more impactful on me than standing in front of 50,000 people in the Philippines playing my song. And I remember having to leave the room because I felt like I was going to start crying. And yeah, and I think that's what made me think, you know what, I'd like to feel that feeling again. And that's when I did a deeper dive into the therapeutic side of hypnosis, or the subconscious and things like that. And then there was a long journey of finding my method and my way of doing it that I felt resonated with the people that I was encountering and that were coming to me for help. And yeah, and as they say, the rest is therapeutic history. But and yeah, it just became my obsession and my passion, and it hasn't really changed from that, if I'm honest.
So what kind of is the control system, I guess, in a nutshell?
Okay, in a nutshell, right? That's a really difficult thing to do, put it in a nutshell. But put it this way: it works on all the principles of hypnosis, which is dealing directly with your subconscious rather than your conscious. But the difference with the control system is it doesn't use any ritualistic trance process. So there's no closing your eyes, relaxing, drifting off to happy hypnoland. It is literally direct communication with your subconscious to create radical changes in the way you feel, the way you respond, and that sort of thing.
The TED Talk, you have a book, it's Clear Your Head, I believe is.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
On Amazon. And you're now obviously, well, given the pandemic, obviously there's been a lot made about, a lot of discussion, rightfully so, about people's state of mind, various, whether you're older or you're a child. What have you been seeing, and have you been helping people? Obviously, we're all working remotely, so.
Yeah, I think what I'm experiencing, there's a lot of people who haven't struggled with their emotional well-being previously. Like maybe they haven't, I'm one of those people that hasn't been through a lot of trauma in my life, and as a result, when social anxiety started to rear its head, it hit me very hard because I wasn't used to overcoming emotional challenges or going through a lot. I'm seeing a lot of people who haven't had to deal with massive challenges, never struggled with their anxiety levels before, suddenly feel massively anxious about some aspect of what's going on. Yeah. The word unprecedented gets used a lot, I think rightly so, but whether it be health anxiety in terms of pandemic, whether it be for your business, for your livelihood, where businesses are being shut down, whether it be just the state of the world in general, because it suddenly has become global concerns for everyone. I'm seeing a lot of people who are feeling out of control of the direction their life is going in some way. And that's causing a lot of anxiety. And so what I'm seeing are people with those natural knock-on effects of suddenly feeling like, hang on, am I developing an anxiety issue now? Because I feel anxious a lot of the time. And I think a lot of the time, we've just got to let people realize that this isn't that you're broken. This is that your mind is being asked to cope with something that it has no experience of coping with. And it's feeling, I don't know, it's doubting its ability to rise to the challenge. Yeah, because there's a lot of the stuff that's causing it that we're not in control of. And that's what I'm seeing, is people feeling a lack of control, I think.
And it's a natural response. It's not some complete untoward thing.
And this is it. When we feel under threat, we go into a stress response. That's how it is. But so that fight or flight response that we have, that's a natural response. That's kept us alive throughout the generations, with the ability to run away from the attacking animal or to chase down the thing that we've got to kill to eat, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But when it triggers regularly, it's not meant to be a constant state. Yeah. The fight or flight response is meant to be something that triggers very quickly, saves our life, and then we're out of it. But what's going on at the moment, the threat is a constant threat because it's an ongoing situation. What we like over a year into this pandemic now. And if we've lived in a state of semi-fight or flight because we feel under threat by it, then we're getting to that stage now where we're emotionally and physically at the end of our rope, so, and it gradually becomes this cumulative thing where we're struggling on top of struggling on top of struggling. And it is a natural response, but unfortunately, sometimes our mind misinterprets the best response for the situation we're given, and that's what's happening a lot, I think.
I believe on your website, if I saw correctly, you can sign up for a kind of a demo. I think you're helping someone overcome a fear of snakes, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think that's in the demo on the website. Yeah.
So what have been some of the tougher cases for you?
Cool, that's a really good question. I tend to people say, what's the difficult thing to treat? So therapeutically speaking, if you talk to the therapeutic community about what's difficult to treat, people normally talk about trauma, things like that. But I don't find a particular issue difficult to treat. It's always down to the individual. I tend to work, I work with the client rather than the condition. Work with the person rather than the problem. And what happens is you'll see people overcoming things that they've had for years very, very quickly, just because their mind is ready to change and is open to accept a new version of reality rather than the one that we've created for ourselves. So it would be very difficult for me to say, this is the thing that I've worked on that was the most difficult thing. I've had unusual things that I didn't know if I could help with. So I remember one client came through with narcolepsy. And I had no idea if we could get any joy with that. But in that particular instance, we got a really good result, and we sorted that out for them. But it doesn't, I should say, I'm not suggesting that every person dealing with narcolepsy can be helped with hypnosis or the control system. But for that particular person at that particular time, her mind was able to and ready to make the change. So I've seen unusual things, and you know, some things come through more commonly than others, you know, but it's generally about the individual. I think a lot of the time, the reason we don't update our responses, our patterns of thought, our thinking, is because we didn't realize it was an option to do so. I think a lot of the time when we're dealing with anxiety or depression, it gets framed to us as a disorder or a condition that we are just unfortunately burdened with. When what I discovered from my journey and what I know from working with people is that your mind updates its responses all the time, but it won't update it beyond what it feels is the scope of its capacity. So if you think I was born with depression, then your mind never attempts to operate outside the framework of depression. As much as you consciously try to, your subconscious is saying, yeah, but the reality is I'm always going to be default depressed. And as a result, you're not necessarily fully engaged at a subconscious level on updating this. So I think the thing that I am always pleased about is when somebody comes to me because they're probably accepting, I think change is possible. Yeah. And that's the first step. By the time they've got to me, they're a long way on their journey. They've started out with, I'm experiencing this problem and this is just the way I am. And they've moved on to, let me go and see this guy because I think change is possible. And that's when it becomes doable to change things quickly. You know?
Do you deal with, or have you helped a lot of performers or artists in various disciplines?
You know, I don't. I see people for performance anxiety in terms of public speaking more than performing musically. But I have seen some, but it's not because I don't really talk about my musical past in my marketing. It's not something that people track me down to help with. But I tend to, because I move in entrepreneur circles, I suppose, I see more people about public speaking and the social anxiety stuff in terms of carrying themselves in a way that they're comfortable with in a social environment. That's what I see more of, yeah.
Well, speaking of entrepreneurship, I mean, you've got those social anxiety, but even that personal, I mean, that can permeate all aspects of your life then. I mean, you might just talk yourself out of beyond, again, you talked about the normal level of anxiety of, you know, that kind of impetus, adrenaline, whatever, but that level of social anxiety, do you find that really permeates to a larger extent anyone's endeavors outside of a face-to-face or, you know, group interaction?
In the sense that it impacts broad reaching across their lives, or
Right.
yeah. Well, this is the thing. I think what it does when we struggle in a social environment, whether it be one-to-one or in a group environment, it can be anything really. Any situation where we fear the judgment of the person in front of us tends to be the trigger, you know, just broadly speaking. And that can impact so much across the board because it damages our self-esteem when we look, you know, forward in our mind at the situation we've got to put ourselves into. And our first thought is, can I handle that? I think my anxiety might trigger in that situation. And I know when that triggers, I don't feel able to do anything. So we look at ourselves and we say, I'm not great at handling things, you know, challenges. And it just damages our self-esteem. As a result, the next time we think about doing something, we're coming at it from quite a low level of self-esteem. I'm not that good at dealing with situations, and it becomes this sort of spiraling downward circle where each experience and each thought just kind of exacerbates the problem. So it's, yeah, it generally starts at a certain level, a certain thought, a certain idea, a certain experience. And then what we do is we spiral it downwards. Yeah, it's like a vicious cycle. The good news is, though, when we have a vicious cycle going on, to change that, if we can invalidate one of the truths that perpetuates it, then we disable the effect of it completely, and we start to move back upwards and start to feel a bit better and start to grow our self-esteem. But it's that self-perpetuating thing that leads us. It's like a feedback loop, effectively, where it's just getting worse and worse and worse, you know. So yeah, it can reach effects just from an idea of, I went and chatted with those people and they laughed at me, you know, like when we're a kid or something, you know, or problems.
Yeah, I know you have we're running out of time here. I was thinking a little bit about just, you know, my personal experiences with it. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my parents dropped me off. They went out to dinner with some friends, and they left me with the teenagers. And I think as I recall, I just kind of went to the staircase and sat there forever until they came back. Anything, and I realized it's kind of, you know, I still kind of, you know, I think we all do have some level of that, unless you're a complete extrovert, you really dive into people, but it really kind of never goes away, does it? I mean, is it kind of a maintenance thing that you teach people to kind of recognize these feelings when they crop up? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right there. That's like the origins of it, where the child that doesn't know how to stay safe and keep happy, doesn't know how to run this aspect of their life, develops a strategy. Oh, hi, that seemed to work, you know. And there's that bit of us then that runs that strategy each time we're in a similar situation. And I certainly felt that. I was really aware of the desire to run into the corner of the room and look busy with something. You know, this is why we've got our phones now. If you want to spot the person dealing with social anxiety, look for the room of people and the guy in the corner who seems to be really intently on his phone. He's probably not. He's probably just scrolling nothing, but he needs to look like, I'm not talking to you because I'm quite busy right now, rather than because I simply can't handle the idea that you won't like me. Yeah, and when you say it always stays there, if that doesn't get addressed, if we don't take the time and do what's necessary to educate that little child that's still sitting on the stairs, then it will always be there in invoking that strategy. Yeah. If we can talk to that bit and get it to realize that, yeah, that was appropriate because the situation, we couldn't handle it. We didn't have the skills on board. We didn't have the knowledge or the experience. As an adult, you know, this is one of the things I had to come to terms with, that my social anxiety was a fear of repeating a bullying experience when I was at school, that was just everyone pointing and laughing at me. And I needed to point out to myself how many metrics within that equation had now shifted, weren't the same anymore. Yeah, I'm not surrounded by kids that want to laugh at me. I'm not in a situation where I don't know how to handle or talk. I don't know what I'm talking about. You know, I'm in a situation now where I know who I am. Yeah, I understand strategies better. And also the major important thing, my happiness no longer depends on the people in this room accepting me. Yeah, I can leave this room now. Yeah, or I can go somewhere else. I can find other people. When we're at school, you know, those first experiences, for example, what you just described, you were left with the teenagers, right? If you're going to have a good time in that, you don't get to leave that room. The most you get to do is sit in the corridor on the stairs, yeah? You don't simply get to say, you know what, Mum, I'll come with you tonight. I'll do whatever you're doing, because I think I'd rather do that. It's like, if I'm getting bullied at school, I don't get to say, you know what, Mum, I'm not going to go into school today, because it's not my decision. It's adults' decision. Now, I have autonomy over my movements. I don't need to get this person or that person to like me, because if they don't, I can go elsewhere and find people that do like me. You know, I no longer have to change me to fit in with the limited number of people I'm allowed to interact with. I can do what I want there. So understanding these things at a subconscious level enabled me to realize, actually, that little bit of me that is the frightened child doesn't need to be frightened anymore, because we're so much more than we were, and the situation is so different to how it was. So that strategy no longer needs to be employed, you know? And things like that, if we address it directly, it doesn't need to sit there forever. We can actually get past it and change the way we respond to things, you know?
Excellent. Excellent. That's a great summary, and I think that's a good place for us to wrap up here. Tim, thank you so much for your time and your insights here.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Jeff.
Patients are really thankful for that, and hopefully this is helpful to some people, and maybe some people get in touch with you. We'll put all your contact information down in the description, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate that.
And Tim, hey, thank you again. Have a great day.
You too. You take care, Jeff.
Take care.